angels. I'm so happy that you're here. So I thought tonight we could start the new Celtic Tales book since we finished the first one. This is volume 2. Not 1, but 2. Not 1, but 2. However, I have already found duplicate stories. We'll deal with that later. So let's get you guys ready for stories. I want you all to get the lighting the way that you like it. You can have it bright, you can have it dark. There's only one rule, and all my angels are saying it right now. No lit candles. You can have battery operated candles, that's fine. But lit candles, relaxing and going to sleep, they don't mix very well. However, get it the way you like, okay? And then get someplace comfy. Whether it's a sofa, a bed, a chair, a big cushion on the floor, whatever you like, a yoga mat even, some people like. Make yourself as comfortable as you can, okay? And then I want you to try to relax, to really think about relaxing, and think about how good you're going to feel as you drift off to sleep. If you're ever having trouble sleeping, I learned this a long time ago from somebody. And actually, I learned it as a form of self-hypnosis for when I had to take a driving test. That's a whole other story. Someday we'll talk about that. But you don't concentrate on the end result. So if you're trying to go to sleep, don't think about sleeping. Think about how much you enjoy the process of relaxation. Think about how much you like feeling your body sink into your bed or your couch or whatever. Think about how much you enjoy that feeling you get just as you enter drowsiness and sleepiness. Don't put yourself through so much pressure trying, I have to get to sleep, I have to get to sleep. Think about the process to get there, okay? And we're going to do our deep breathing because that signals our brain that it's time to relax. That's why I get us to do these deep breathing. It's a signal to your brain as part of a routine. So for those that are new, thanks for coming. And we do this regularly on my channel. And what it is you breathe in through your nose for a count of 4. You hold gently for a count of 4. And you breathe out through your mouth for a count of 4. If you can only do 1 or 2, you do 1 or 2. If you can't do it at all, but you enjoy listening, do that too, okay? Ready? Let's begin. Breathe in through the nose. Hold. And out. Good. Once more. 1, 2, 3, 4. Hold. 1, 2, 3, 4. Breathe out. Last one. 3, 4. Hold. 1, 2, 3, 4. Out. 1, 2, 3, 4. Okay. Now snuggle in and let me tell you a story. This one is from Scotland and it's called The Witch of Fife. In the kingdom of Fife, in the days of long ago, there lived an old man and his wife. The old man was a quiet sort, but the old woman was flighty and capricious, and some of the neighbors looked at her askance and whispered to each other that they sorely feared she was a witch. The husband was afraid of it too, for she had a curious habit of disappearing in the evening and staying out all night, and when she returned in the morning, she looked quite white and tired, as if she'd been traveling far or working hard. He used to try to watch her carefully in order to find out where she went and what she did. But he never managed to do so, for she always slipped out of the door when he wasn't looking, and before he could reach it to follow her, she would vanish completely. At last, one day, when he could stand the uncertainty of it no more, he asked her to tell him straight out, was she a witch or not? And his blood ran cold. Without the slightest hesitation, she answered that yes, she was, and that if he would promise not to let anyone know, the next time she went on one of her midnight expeditions, she would tell him all about it. The man promised, and he had not long to wait, for the very next week was the new moon, which, as everyone knows, is the time when witches like to stir abroad. On the first night of the new moon, the wife vanished and did not return until daybreak of the next morning. When he asked her where she had been, she told him in great glee how she and 4 like-minded companions had met at the old kirk on the moor, and had mounted branches of the green bay tree and stalks of hemlock, which were instantly changed to horses. They had ridden swift as the wind over the country, hunting the foxes, the weasels, and the owls. At last they had swum in the Forth, and came to the top of Bellamond, and there they dismounted from their horses, and drunk beer that had been brewed in no earthly brewery, out of horn cups that had been fashioned by no mortal hands. After that, a wee man had jumped up from under a great mossy stone, with a tiny set of bagpipes under his arm, and he piped such wonderful music that, at the sound of it, the very trouts jumped out of the loch below, the stoats crept out of their holes, and the crows and herons came and sat on the trees in the darkness just to listen. And all the witches had danced until they were so weary that when the time came for them to mount their steeds again, they could scarce sit on them for their fatigue. The man listened to this long story in silence, shaking his head, and when it was finished, all that he answered was, "And what the better are you for all your dancing? You've been a deal more comfortable here at home." At the next new moon, the old wife went off again for the night, and when she returned in the morning, she told her husband how on this occasion she and her friends had taken cockle shells for boats, and had sailed away over the stormy sea until they reached Norway. And there they mounted invisible horses of wind, and they ridden and ridden over mountains, glens, and glaciers, until they reached the land of the Lapps, lying under its mantle of snow. And there all the elves and fairies and mermaids of the north were holding festivals with the warlocks and the brownies and the pixies, and even the phantom hunters themselves, who are never looked upon by mortal eyes. The witches from Fife held festival with them, and danced and feasted and sang. And what was of more consequence, they learned from them certain wonderful words, which when uttered would bear them through the air, and would undo all bolts and bars, and so gain them admittance to any place whatsoever they wanted to be. After that they had come home, delighted with the new knowledge they had acquired. "What took you to such a land as that?" asked the old man with a contemptuous grunt. "You would have been a slight bit warmer in your own bed." But when the wife returned from her next adventure, he showed little more interest in her doings, for she told him how she and her friends had met in one of their cottages, and having heard that Lord Bishop of Carlisle had some very rare wine in his cellar, had placed their feet on the crook from which the pot hung, and they pronounced the magic words which they had learned from the elves of Lapland. And lo and behold, they flew up the chimney like whiffs of smoke, and sailed through the air like little wreaths of cloud, and in less time than it takes to tell, they landed at the bishop's palace in Carlisle. The bolts and the bars flew loose before them, and they went down to the cellar and sampled his fine wine, and were back in Fife as fine, sober old women by the cock crow. When he heard this, the man started from his chair in earnest, for he loved good wine above all things, and it was but seldom that it came his way. "By my troth, but you are my wife to be proud of," he cried. "Tell me the words, woman. I will go and sample his lordship's wine for myself." But the wife shook her head. "No, no, I cannot do that," she said. "For if I did, and you told it over again, it would turn the whole world upside down. For everyone would be leaving their own lawful work and flying about the world, doing other folks' business and having other folks' dainties. So just bide content. You get on fine with the knowledge you already possess." Although the old man tried to persuade her with all the soft, sweet words that he could think of, she would not tell him the secret. But he was a sly old man, and he thought of the bishop's wine gave him no rest. So night after night, he went and hid by the old woman's cottage in the hope that his wife and her friends would meet there. And at last his troubles were rewarded. For one evening the 5 old women assembled. In low tones and with chuckles of laughter, they recounted all that had befallen them in Lapland. Then, running to the fireplace, one after the other, they climbed on a chair and put their feet on the sooty crook. Then they repeated the magic words, and presto! They were up the chimney and away before the old man could draw his breath. "Well, I can do that too," he said. He crawled out from his hiding place and he ran to the fire. He put his foot on the crook and repeated the words. Up the chimney he went, and he flew through the air after his wife and her companions, as if he had been a warlock born. As witches are not in the habit of looking over their shoulders, they never noticed he was following them, until they reached the bishop's palace and went down to the cellar. Then, when they found that he was with them, they were not well pleased. However, there was no help for it, and they settled down to enjoy themselves. They tapped this cask of wine, and they tapped that, drinking a little of each, but not too much. For they were cautious old women, and knew if they wanted to be home before the cock crowed, it behooved them to keep their heads clear. But the old man was not so wise. He sipped and he sipped until at last he became quite drowsy. He lay down on the floor and he fell asleep. His wife, seeing this, thought she would teach him a lesson not to be so curious in the future. So when she and her 4 friends thought that it was time to be gone, she departed without waking him. He slept peacefully for some hours, until 2 of the bishop's servants, coming down to draw wine, almost fell over him in the darkness. Greatly astonished at his presence there, for the cellar door was locked, they dragged him to the light, shook him and cuffed him, and asked him how he came to be there. The poor old man was so confused at being awakened in such a rough way, and his head just seemed to whirl around. All he could stammer was that he came from Fife, and that he traveled on the midnight wind. As soon as the servants heard this, they cried out that he must be a warlock, and they dragged him before the bishop. And as bishops in those days had a holy horror of warlocks and witches, he ordered the man to be burned alive. When the sentence was pronounced, you may be very sure that the poor old man wished with all his heart that he was quietly at home in bed, and he had never hankered after the bishop's wine. But it was too late for that now. The servants dragged him out into the courtyard, put a chain around his waist, and fastened it to a great iron stake. They piled bundles of wood round his feet and set them alight. As the first little tongue of flame crept up, the old man thought that his last hour had come. But when he thought of that, he forgot completely that his wife was a witch. For just as the flames began to singe his breeches, there was a swish and a flutter in the air, and a great gray bird with outstretched wings appeared. It swooped down suddenly, perched for a moment on the old man's shoulder. It gave one fierce croak and flew away again. But to the old man's ear, the croak was the sweetest music he'd ever heard. For to him it was not the croak of an earthly bird, but the voice of his wife whispering the magic words to him. When he heard them, he jumped for joy, for he knew they were the words of deliverance. He shouted them aloud, his chains fell off, and he mounted in the air, up and up, while the onlookers watched in awestruck silence. He flew right away to the kingdom of Fife, where he found himself once more safely at home, and you may be very sure he never tried to find out any of his wife's secrets again, but left her to her own devices. quite like that story. I was getting a little concerned there. But my darlings, it's time for you to be asleep. So, if your eyes are not closed, I want your eyes closed. I want your breathing even and slow. I want your brain filled with contentment. I want you to think of doors inside your brain that lead to the most wonderful dreams. And the only trouble you have tonight is choosing which one. Do you go through one and go to the happiest place you've been? Do you go to another and see the biggest adventure you'll ever have? Do you go to another and sleep on the clouds? Or the last, where you slide down the rainbow into the softest bed you'll ever feel? The choices are yours, my darlings. All you have to do is sleep. And sleep with the knowledge that I love you, I value you, I honor you, and I'm so very, very glad that you were born.